Two elderly Israeli hostages have been released by the Islamist militant group Hamas. The women were first transferred to Egypt, then handed over to the Israeli military before being taken to a medical facility in Tel Aviv. Israel says at least 222 people were captured by Hamas, including more elderly people and children. The United States wants Israel to delay its expected ground invasion of Gaza to allow for more time to secure the release of further hostages.
Medical teams bundled the freed Israeli hostages into waiting ambulances. This footage on Egyptian TV revealing the latest release at Egypt's border with Gaza. The women, aged 79 and 85, were kidnapped by Hamas militants from their homes during the terrorist attack on Israel more than 2 weeks ago. Finally free, they were quickly transferred to Tel Aviv for treatment. There returned some rare good news amid the conflict.
We have received the two hostages. We are very excited. They look okay. Their medical condition is okay. And they're speaking to us. When we received them, we brought them to their family members. The meeting was very, very moving.
Their homecoming, a huge relief.
I believed this moment would come. I wanted this moment to come. It doesn't matter if I believed it or not. This moment is here.
While their return is welcome, the women's husbands are among the 220 people Israel says are still being held captive by Hamas.
Bring them home!
As uncertainty surrounds their fates, their families' fear and frustration are mounting. Israel has been amassing troops and weapons at the Gaza border for days. But US media reports say Washington has advised it to delay an anticipated ground offensive to allow negotiations to free more hostages. An outcome their waiting families say can't come soon enough.
DW's correspondent Rebecca Ritters is in Jerusalem, and she told us more about the release of these hostages.
Well, the two elderly women, as we just heard, were released late last night. They do appear to be in relatively good health, though they haven't been able to take their regular medication in the time that they have been being held hostage, so they'll be undergoing more tests and evaluations today. But they did, in the video that was released by Hamas of the prisoner exchange, they did, the hostage release, I should say, nothing was exchanged. They do appear to be in relatively good health. They've been flown to a hospital in Tel Aviv where they've been checked out. They've been met with their families. They've been able to talk with their families. They actually walked out of walked out across the crossing on foot, so they do appear to be in relatively good health. Now their husbands, as you just heard in that report, are still left behind. They're still being held hostage in Gaza. Interestingly, one of the prisoners that was released and her husband are relatively well-known peace activists, and they've worked most of their lives assisting Gazans who are seeking medical treatment in Israel. They would go to the border, help with the transfer and bring them into Israel to get receive medical treatment. So it's not clear whether that had anything to do with the release, with the decision to pick these two women to be released. But it's certainly very interesting background there. You can see in the video as well that as they're walking out, that with the Hamas militant who is taking them to the ICRC humanitarian workers for the exchange, that she turns around, she shakes the hand of the Hamas militant. So that is perhaps an indication also of how the hostages are being treated, and that they perhaps gives hope for the others that are still being held, that they're still in a fairly decent condition.
Indeed. Do we have any insights into how this release came to be? What do we know about the deal that secured their release?
Well, we don't know a huge amount about the deal. We know it was brokered between Egypt and Hamas. Days of negotiations have been going into this prisoner exchange. In fact, there were rumours earlier yesterday that some 50 hostages might actually be released, the dual nationals being held. Obviously, details still quite scant. These are just rumours at this stage, but it's being reported that that is still in negotiations. Now, Qatar have been playing a big role in these hostage releases. We saw the other two a few days ago, and these two, and they will continue to play that role. Egypt also involved. Now, it's thought that Israel was not party to these negotiations, but that they were still somehow involved in that there was a cessation of bombing in order to allow for the hostages' safe return and also for the humanitarian workers who were receiving them.
So we now have 4 people in total who've been freed by Hamas. Where you are in Israel, is there now more optimism that we might see more people released in the coming days?
I think there is a cautious optimism. As I mentioned, we've been hearing that potentially in the coming hours or days, another 50 hostages may be released. It's not clear whether they'll be released in one go. We know that so far, Hamas has not received anything in return, so there's still a chance that they'll try and use the releases for more negotiation. But we do expect that we will be seeing more hostages released. And there is also an indication that the US are calling for this planned, this imminent, this expected ground invasion to be held off in order for that to happen.
Well, thank you so much for your reporting. That was our correspondent, Rebecca Ritters. And more than 50 trucks in 3 convoys have passed through the Rafah border crossing from Egypt since Saturday, bringing aid for civilians in Gaza. They were carrying food, water, and medical supplies. Aid agencies say that aid is only a tiny fraction of what is needed. The deliveries also don't include fuel. The UN says fuel is urgently needed for water and sanitation systems, hospitals, as well as bakeries. Hiba Tibi is the country director for care in the Palestinian territories. I spoke to her earlier, and I asked her about the situation in Gaza now that dozens of aid trucks have entered.
Thank you so much and for your question and interest in knowing the situation in Gaza. The humanitarian situation is becoming more and more critical by the hour and not by the day. So we started to count by days when the system, the medical system is going to be out of service, when the bakeries are going to be out of service. But now we are counting in hours. As you can see in this image, we have been able to secure necessities for immediate requirements that are needed for survival and life-saving. And this includes water, food. Everyone is asking for fuel because it is replacing electricity. Drinking water is an issue. Medical supplies that are required, again, for life-saving. Not only for emergency emergency aid, but also for the inpatients in the hospitals. This is, of course, as you can see in the images, the overcrowding, the consumption of contaminated water. We already started to see in the UN schools and the overcrowded what we call designated shelters, and which are schools, for instance, storage facilities, or clinics owned by the UN. We started to see signs of diseases, waterborne diseases like diarrhea, rash, even other diseases that are becoming more and more risky at the top of each hour.
So a very desperate situation. I'm sorry, I just want to jump in because we have limited time. I'm curious, can you tell us who is negotiating with whom to get trucks in with more aid? And are there any signs that a constant flow of trucks will be allowed?
All of that, the negotiations are happening through the UN, and they are leading on behalf of all of the international, national humanitarian organizations. Where we voice up our requirements, they do the analysis also in collaboration with the different actors, and they will lead on the negotiation. The signs, as you mentioned, this is a very tiny amount of trucks entering on daily basis, but everything is welcome. We hope that more trucks are entering, but also on the top of that, to have restoration and immediate supply of water and electricity. And definitely, as you know, fuel is not under the negotiation of the entrance. Very limited amount of fuel was allowed to enter Gaza for the UN facilities. But of course, this is restricted to the people in the south and those who are benefiting from the shelters. But there are many actors, many people and civilians in the north, in the center, and who could not even access the designated shelters by the UN.
Yeah, fuel certainly has been a sticking point for Israel. They're worried that Hamas will be able to use it for their purposes. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about distribution of the aid that has made it into Gaza. Who is your organization coordinating with to decide what goes where? And is it possible to work with the Hamas authorities to this end?
So I will explain to you what we do in CARE International, and this is, I assume, what is happening with other organizations. the distribution of aid. So even if these trucks, imagine with me that they entered Gaza and it was safe for them to enter. Now the infrastructure is severely affected, and also the safety and security of our colleagues and workers to distribute is not guaranteed. So what happens is that we are coordinating with two main actors, Red Crescent and also the UN, specifically UNRWA, who are managing the shelters. They have sort of centralized area where we send all these necessities, and they will be distributing them. Also, on the other hand, this is focused on the shelters, the people in the shelter. But in the same time, care staff and our partners, they will be also distributing for those who are outside of the shelters. So, for instance, people in certain areas that are not necessarily inside the UN facilities. So this is how we managed to do the transportation so far.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us on DW about this important issue. That is Hiba Tibi, Country Director for Care in the Palestinian territories. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We spoke to journalist Hazem Balousha and asked him if the limited aid that is reaching Gaza is improving the situation for civilians there yet.
We are talking about 54 trucks came in 3 days in total, in comparison with a regular time before the war. 500 trucks used to come daily with different items. Mainly, these trucks, they are talking about three main things: food, medical supplies, and water. While Gaza need more other things, and these aid come through UNRWA and Red Crescent. Still, like these aids go to some of the hospitals and to UNRWA refugee UNRWA schools, like where refugees taking it as a shelter. But ordinary people in their houses, they are not receiving these aids. Plus, the most important is the fuel, which is not coming yet. The fuel is affecting the function of the hospitals, the transportation, the pumping of the water to the houses, the desalination stations, the treatment of wastewater. All of these things need fuel, and still these things.
On October 7th, Kibbutz Beeri was one of the first communities that was attacked by Hamas terrorists. More than 2 weeks later, dozens of residents have not yet been located, and authorities are still trying to identify bodies. DW's Max Sander visited the kibbutz as part of an organized press tour. A word of warning to our viewers, the following report contains graphic descriptions of the Hamas attack.
Security is tight in Kibbutz Beeri today. But at dawn on the morning of October 7th, the army was nowhere to be seen. The more than 1,000 people living here were among the first to be attacked by Hamas fighters. They roamed the kibbutz for hours, firing machine guns, grenades, rocket launchers. The Hamas-led terrorists moved from house to house over hours, killing civilians or taking them hostage. Today, this kibbutz is deserted. All what's left are burnt, destroyed houses and a community in ruins. The Israeli authorities want the world to see this and hear from people who were there.
They burned the house on them, smoke them out. And when they finally opened the doors because they couldn't breathe anymore, they decided who's to live, who's to die.
Rami Gold was part of a small group defending the kibbutz. He said they fired till they ran out of bullets.
And I got to tell you that story because 2 angels came. 2 people from reserve soldiers. I have no idea where they came from. Came to us, gave us ammunition and a cell phone so we can call our families to tell them we're okay. And we kept on going, kept on fighting until it was dark, till the army arrived.
When the fighting stopped, emergency responders looking for survivors found scenes of horror.
She was butchered open, the stomach was... Small children, a boy and a girl, hands tied to the back and tortured. And I'll say tortured now, yes, I'll say it. The father was without an eye. They took out his eye. The mother a breast was cut off. And while the children were brutally attacked, and they are sitting in the middle and eating the food of the holiday food, holiday meal that this This family was supposed to eat.
Physical evidence of what happened at places around the country arrives here at a makeshift morgue in central Israel. These are some of the up to 200 unaccounted for people. More are still being found.
We are working day and night at shifts, trying to identify each and every one.
This is hard because people were disfigured, mutilated, burned.
We are here doing what we're doing because we think this is a holy mission. For us, identifying the last casualties and all of the civilians that got killed is so important. It's for us, we want to give them their final respect.
Families waiting to bury their dead and those who saw what happened are angry as well as bereft. At Kibbutz Beeri, Hamas killed more than 100 people, around 10% of the community. For Rami Gold, whose sister-in-law was killed that morning, there can only be one response. Israel must completely destroy Gaza.
They made a terrible mistake. They hurt us very bad. But the damage they will suffer will be even worse. And the idea is they will never think of doing that again. That's the only way we can live together, by them understanding that they can't do it to us anymore.
Emergency responder Yossi Landau, who saw the horror, says Hamas cannot be part of the future.
We went through a lot. We went through the Holocaust. We went through a lot. We'll be strong. The world is supporting us. Yes, we want the peace. It's a very important thing, the peace. Yes, but not with Hamas.
Peace seems a faraway prospect, here in the ruins of Kibbutz Beeri.